I want to thank you for all coming out tonight. And this is a great event, one that I've been excited about every year since I've been here at SAM. So I want to welcome all of you. There are a few thank yous I'd like to give before we start the program tonight. I would like to thank the university leadership, including President White, Provost Stevenson, and of course, Dean Lee, for giving us the sort of environment where we can have these kinds of events. And a particular thanks to Dean Lee because he supports this financially, philosophically, artistically, and I am so very thankful for all the support he's given me, this program, the department, the college, all of you. We can't thank him enough. I also would like to thank his office staff who helped put this event together. They do it every year. Specifically, Deanna Briones, where is she? She probably left. No, she's back there. And of course, Brittany Johnson. They're invaluable to us being able to do this. I also want to thank my staff. They make me better at my job. Jaron Millam and Terry Fuller. No wave. I also would like to thank my MFA faculty who continue to inspire students in their writing. Katie Jean Schinkel, Scott Kalkinen, Ginger Coe, and Nick Lance. And in addition to those people, I want to thank all of our students, all of the faculty in my department, all the faculty at the university. And then I want to pay one special sort of thanks, I don't believe she's here tonight, but to Amanda Nolan O'Banion, who basically was the person who dreamed this up and made the initial connections with the National Book Foundation. And it's really her vision and her laying the groundwork that allows us to continue this really, really awesome program. So we should all thank her whenever we see her. Okay. And I finally want to say thanks to the writers who are here with us and to the National Book Foundation. This is really a significant event. It's one of the oldest partnerships that the foundation has with the university. I think we and Amherst are the two oldest. And what this does for our community, for our students, it just can't be understated. And I see a lot of students out there, and I'm sure your professors encourage you strongly to go. But I think you're going to find this is a very rewarding experience that you had, and you should take advantage of it every year that we do it, every year that you're here. Today, one of our writers visited Mance Park Middle School and spoke with the students there. It was a wonderful, wonderful event. Darcie was great with the kids, and they asked great questions, even stumped her a couple of times on questions. But it was really nice to see that interaction and that kind of community engagement that this program allows. So again, I want to thank everybody, and I'm going to kind of turn things over to the Director of Programs for the National Book Foundation, Natalie Green.
Okay, y'all, I was told to project. Can you hear me okay? Great. How are y'all doing? Yeah? I know we're under some, weird mood lighting, and sometimes in a room like this, we gotta bring the energy, because these authors are super fantastic, and we're really, really excited to welcome them out. I will try to keep it brief so we can get to the good stuff. But really wanted to echo all of Jake's thanks. Many thanks especially to Brittany Johnson and Deanna Briones and the entire College of the Humanities and MFA program for their partnership, which is going on a decade, and really all of the moving pieces that makes an event like this possible. We're so happy to be back at Sam Houston to celebrate National Book Award honored authors and their work. Some of you might be familiar with the National Book Foundation as the presenter of the National Book Awards, which I joke is you see the Sticker on a book, that's us. It's very exciting. We've honored the best literature published in the United States for nearly 75 years. Through the support of readers like you and partners like Sam Houston, we work year-round to reach readers all over the country through our education and public programming. We're in 48 states and counting, so very close to all 50. And we also work with Sam Houston on our annual internship program, hosting a stellar Sam Houston State student each summer in our New York office. This summer, we had the real pleasure and delight of working alongside Miranda Ramirez, MFA candidate, woo, and founding editor and director of Defunct Magazine and Press. If you're interested in learning more about what we're up to, I have to do my PBS special. Please visit our website at nationalbook.org. The National Book Awards are every November, and we broadcast them for free online for readers all across the country, so you can register on our website at nationalbook.org. And we also have a clipboard on our lovely bookseller table in the back. If you want to give us your email, we'll add you to our newsletter sign up. And we promise not to bombard you. Those only come out like once a month, so it's not too bad. Tonight, we're celebrating National Book Award honored authors Darcie Littlebadger, Roger Reeves, and Marytza K. Rubio. We'll get to hear readings from each author, followed by a conversation moderated by Tomas Q. Morin, poet, author, and associate professor at Rice University. While we so wish that Darcie was able to join us in person, we're so grateful for the whole Sam Houston State community and our expert AV folks for supporting a quick pivot. So that's why you see these lovely, beautiful screens on either side of me. For a quick housekeeping note, we will open up at the end for a few audience questions, so definitely start plotting now. Please raise your hand. Miranda's going to be roving around with this little mic, and Tomas will call upon folks. Many thanks also to the Sam Houston State Bookstore, our bookseller tonight, also in the back of the room. And now I'm delighted to introduce the folks on stage and exit the stage so we can get to the good stuff. Darcie Littlebadger is a Liapan Apache writer with a PhD in oceanography. Her critically acclaimed debut novel, there she is, it's like magic, a lot so, won the Locus Award for Best First Novel and is a Nebula, Ignite, and Lodestar finalist. Her second fantasy novel, A Snake Falls to Earth, received a Nebula Award, an Ignite Award, and a Newbery Honor, and was longlisted for the National Book Awards. This is also going to be like magic. Roger Reeves is the author of the poetry collections King Me and Best Barbarian, a National Book Award finalist and winner of the Griffin Poetry Prize and Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award, and the new essay collection, Dark Days, Fugitive Essays. A 2021 to 2022 Harvard Radcliffe Institute Fellow, Reeves is also the recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, a Ruth Lilly and Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Fellowship, and a Whiting Award, among other honors. He lives in Austin, Texas. This is Roger. We can clap. Marytza K. Rubio's debut story collection, Maria, Maria, and Other Stories, was longlisted for the National Book Award. She lives in Santa Ana, California, woo, woo, and is the Vice President of Community and Culture at Segerstrom Center for the Arts. This is Marytza. We can clap again. Yay! And our esteemed moderator, Thomas Q. Morin, joined us from just down the way in Houston, is the author most recently of the poetry collection Machete and the memoir Let Me Count the Ways. He is the recipient of fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts, and he teaches at Rice University. Enjoy the program, y'all.
Who's going to read first?
Darcie.
Darcie? Oh, Darcie, whenever you're ready.
All right, let's get started. And yeah, I just want to reiterate, thank you so much for the Sam Houston AV for switching this last minute. Yeah, I got sick on Friday, so I do appreciate this and that you have made the space for me to be here anyway. All right, I'm going to actually read a little bit from the first two chapters, just the beginning of each, because my book, A Snake Falls to Earth, is told through the perspectives of two different characters, and from chapter to chapter, it alternates. Chapter 1, Nina, age 9. On the hospital bed, her delicate body cradled between thin white pillows, Rosita dreamed. Pictures in metal, plastic, and wooden frames surrounded her, displaying images of friends and family, giving the appearance of an audience. However, the only visitor in the room was Nina, who sat on a tin chair beside the hat rack-shaped IV pole. Nina couldn't stop looking at the sepia-toned photograph in an oak frame. Propped on the window ledge, it featured a portrait of great-great-grandmother Rosita as a young woman. The picture came from an era long before digital cameras. In those days, people posed in front of a boxy camera and had to wait days to learn whether they'd blinked. In her portrait, young Rosita wore 100 strings of pale seed beads around her neck against her buckskin-clothed chest. Some glinted, each glass bead a mirror for the sun. Young Rosita's fine black hair had symmetrically framed either side of her face with dark, intense eyes. She'd stare directly at the camera lens, as if challenging the photographer to blink first. In most old-timey photos, the subjects didn't smile. Young Rosita's lips quirked in the suggestion of stifled laughter, as if she remembered a joke, one she could barely wait to share. And I'm going to jump ahead to chapter 2. And it is called Cottonmouth is Cast from Home. So this is the perspective of the second character. It's very much different than the first one, as you can tell soon. I can't remember when I first learned about the path to Anywhere You Please. It's one of those stories everybody seems to know, like a persistent thread of gossip. But I'll never forget the day it found me completely by chance in the terror of Robin-kept forest. Thing is, I didn't realize the path was special until I'd already walked it. Where would I be now if I'd known? Mom was overprotective. She didn't chase me from home till I was 15 years old. It happened during a calm midsummer morning. I was napping on the riverbank, dreaming about the sunlight, real sunlight, the kind that's so bright and warm it almost burns. You can still bask in the dimly radiant light that slips into the reflecting world, my home of spirits and monsters, the pseudo-sun we call it. But it's no perfect substitute. Without so much as a greeting, Mama plopped a rucksack full of supplies onto my chest and hissed, "Wake up, Ollie, you're ready." I clutched the bag in a death grip against my skinny chest, hoping I was just having a nightmare. Really? Today? Yes, today. Of course today. When else is there, little snake? She dropped a tightly folded blanket on top of the rucksack, and the weight of densely woven sheep wool caused me to hiss with discomfort and sit up, shifting the parcel's combined weight to my lap. "Can I live down the river?" I asked, fumbling for my spectacles. The world sharpened when I slipped them over my eyes. "If you do, it better be so far downstream that I never see your scaly tail again, kid." At my dismayed gasp, Mama's expression softened, and she added, "If I let all my children stay here, we'd run out of food, space, and patience." "You can make one exception," I ventured, "for me?" "Absolutely not. That'd be unfair." Mama pointed south with her nose. "Leave now and you'll reach the damn town before nightfall." Damned as in beaver dam, not the other dam. The beavers usually have room for a lodger. "And if they don't?" I muttered. "You're a cottonmouth," she snickered. "Sleep under a bush." As if to demonstrate, Mama switched from her false form to her true form. She slithered out of her dress and bared curved, venom-filled teeth in my direction, warning me to skedaddle. I think I'll end there.
Thank you.
Little technical difficulty. I think we're back. Oops, not quite. How y'all doing out there, Sam Houston? All right. So I'm just going to read 2 poems. The reason I give you a 2-poem warning is it's customary in poetry to give a 2-poem warning. Because poets are like preachers, we can go on too long. And I grew up in a Pentecostal church, and in the Pentecostal church, they would give you a little warning so that you could wake up for the end of the sermon. So the first poem I'm going to read is called Grendel. And it's a poem that's a sort of ekphrastic poem in the sense that it's writing about another piece of art. In this case, not visual art is normally an ekphrastic poem, but a recording. It's actually a recording I heard of James Baldwin singing. And I found it completely enlightening to hear James Baldwin's vulnerability. And there was just something else that I heard in his singing voice that I didn't see in the writing. And it kind of pierced me. And it took me years before I was able to actually really write about it. Between the first draft and the last draft were 3 years apart. And I think that's really important. It's the first time that really happened for me. Normally I write a draft, and if it doesn't get together within a few years, it goes into the ether. So, and the only other thing you may need to know is who Grendel is. Some of my English majors and people that remember their literature from high school will remember Grendel is the quote-unquote villain from Beowulf, right? Grendel. All lions must lean into something other than a roar. James Baldwin, for instance, singing Precious Lord. His voice is weary as water broken over his scalp, and a storefront sanctified church's baptismal pool all those years ago when he wanted to be somebody's child and on fire in that being. Lord, I want to be somebody's child. And chosen water spilling over their scalp, water taking the shape of their longing, a deer diving into evening traffic in the furrow drawn in the air over the hood of the car, power, and wanting to be something alive and open. Lord, I want to be alive and open, a glimpse of power, the shuffle of a mother's hand over a sleeping child's forehead, as if clearing the city's rust from its face, which we mostly are, a halo of rust, a glimpse of power. James Baldwin leaning into the word light, his voice jostling that single grain in his throat as if he might drop it or already has. I'm calling to that grain of light, to that gap between his teeth, where the many of us fatherless sleep and bear and be whatever darkness or leaping thing we can be. In James Baldwin's mouth, my difficult beauty, my weak and worn, my future as any number of angels, which is not unlike the beast Grendel coming out of the wild heaven into the hills and halls of the mead house at the harpist's call, with absolute prophecy in his breast and a desire for mercy, for a friend, an end to drifting in loneliness. And in that coming down out of the hills, out of the trees for once, bringing humans the best vision of themselves, which of course must be slaughtered. The last poem I'll read, what's funny is the original draft of this poem was like these two poems. So the two poems that I'm reading were actually originally one draft. They were one poem. So now you'll see a little bit of process, right? They're very different now, but poems are mysterious. Children, listen. It turns out, however, I was deeply mistaken about the end of the world. The body in flames will not be a body in flames, but just a house fire ignored. The black sails of that solitary burning boat rubbing along the legs of lovers flung into a Roman sky by a carousel. The lovers too sick in their love to notice a man drenched in fire on a porch, or a child aflame mistaken for a dog, mistaken for a child, running to tell of a bomb that did not knock before it entered in Gaza with its glad tidings of abundant joy. In Kismira's, a god is weeping in a window, one golden hand raised above his head as if he slipped on the slick rag of the future. Our human kindnesses, unremarkable as the flies, rubbing their legs together while standing on a slice of cantaloupe. Children, you were never meant to be human. You must be the grass. You must grow wildly over the graves. Thank you.
Okay, need a moment. So I'm going to read about animals in art therapy. This is from Art Show. The Almost Philandering Fox, East Gallery. The fox's wife prepared his lunch at dawn and brushed and braided her gray tail at twilight. But when her husband's tail brushed against the red pelt of the chemistry department's new professor, he did not pull away or apologize. Neither did the vixen. Their tails and their eyes kept meeting and lingering over each other's alert fur. The fox lost sleep and sex. He spent his night staring at the wall against the bed he shared with his trusting wife. He didn't fight off intrusive thoughts. He indulged in them and became cranky whenever he was interrupted, always finding reasons to bare his teeth. This, he thought, is infidelity. He knew that touching the vixen would ruin his marriage. He knew ruining his marriage would ruin him. So he didn't touch the vixen or his wife and imprisoned himself in the limbo of love and lust for separate beings. He lost all sleep and sex until he found comfort in cutting out images of his daydreams, creating intricate dioramas of the emerald grass and fire opal autumn trees of his native Kyoto. A pop-up of the fox's haikus are available in the gift shop. The agoraphobic bat ray. After a failed attempt to become the California state bird, the defeated bat ray became paranoid and couldn't control his twitching tail in large crowds, always sensing an unseen threat. Convinced that he would not be able to live down the shame of his failed bid to become a straight treasure, the bat ray began to question his God as to why he was born with wings to soar through the swaying kelp beds and salty water. He took a vow of silence and committed himself to learning the history and struggles of his species. The bat ray's introspection empowered him to overcome the dread of defeat, and his steady intake of prose written by and about bat rays illuminated a path to unwavering self-love. The bat ray is collecting signatures for his third campaign for California state bird. The petition is available at the exit next to his assemblage of discarded campaign buttons. And finally, Sugar Pyramid, Sculpture Garden, see Showtimes. This performance art piece by experimental troupe Colibris Before Columbus challenges and confronts the objectification and exotification of hummingbirds. After 3 years of collecting stories from a variety of peer species, including the Annas, Rufous, Violet-crowned, and broad-tailed, the Colibris created a pointed response to society's treatment of hummingbirds as adorable birdies, and the deliberate erasure of the bird's warrior past. Warning, this is an interactive performance. One member of the audience will be sacrificed each night. Absolutely no photographs allowed. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Those were just absolutely wonderful, wonderful readings. It's such an honor to be moderating a conversation with these three incredibly talented writers. I had a different first question in mind before I heard all of you read. We were chatting about this in the back. We were having a wonderful, very animated discussion. Well, I was observing a very wonderful animated discussion about pigeons. What I, as a fellow animal lover, one thing that immediately occurred to me was that I was in the company, and I feel like Darcie, even though you weren't there for the pigeon conversation, that I was in the company of people who don't see animals as commerce. You know, so the question that occurred to me was, where are animals in your worldview? And how does that translate into your art? And it's a question for all three of you, so anyone can start.
I look at animals and I relate to them as kin. They're just, we have a different way of communicating, or they have a different way of expressing themselves, and it's up to us to be patient and thoughtful in listening to them and learning their intelligence. So I do see animals. I always, family always had dogs, and we have a cat colony, several cat colonies in my neighborhood that we all feed and take care of. Pigeons, I think, is another one that we had so many pigeons that would come through and eat all our cat food, and I would always try to befriend them, learning that wasn't quite possible. And those are just, what's around in, my neighborhood of Santa Ana. But I think just, broader and animals that I don't come to encounter on a daily basis, there is just a great respect for them.
I think similarly, there's a great respect. And for me, one of the things I think about is the way in which so many animals have been subject to human history. And so I've always wondered what they might say about us and how might they characterize us, how might they sort of see us. And that perspective is really a useful perspective as an artist, right? Like to really be seeing, like to be looking at yourself from somewhere else. Du Bois talks about this in terms of race, in terms of double consciousness, but I think that like thinking about the animal consciousness, and not just animals, but like other sort of objects, right? The sort of intelligence of like trees and things like that. Like to me, all of that is really important because they're actually caring for us, thinking about us, even as we are and are not thinking about them.
Right. I'm sure if we had access to the oral histories of pigeons, there would be some very interesting chapters, right, on us.
Yeah.
Darcie?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I'm an expert on pigeons, but I hear that they actually mate. So they have a little pigeon pairs that care about each other in their pigeon ways. So I was I guess a biological oceanographer, and I studied plankton, single-celled plankton. And these are organisms that they're really, you can't see them with the naked eye. I mean, not all plankton are that small, but they're often overlooked. And I just think that it gives you appreciation of the importance of different life forms, because without plankton, the entire ocean would collapse, the whole system. But I'm the type of person, I don't think that we should consider how useful an animal species is to humans to actually care about it, to have empathy. And A Snake Falls to Earth, essentially one of the main thrusts of the plot is there's this little toad person, and the animal people are connected to animal species on Earth. So when the animal species are doing well, the animal people are also doing well. But when the animal species on Earth are going extinct, the animal people of that species they start dying slowly. And so one of the main characters' best friends is this little toad, and it's based off of this real toad species from Texas. Have you heard of the Houston toad? It's not actually wild in Houston anymore, unfortunately, because of things like habitat loss. It was one of the earliest species to be put on the endangered species list, and it's just this tiny little guy, and you should look up pictures of them because their faces always have this serious expression. At least you kind of like personify it as serious. Obviously, it's just the way their face looks. They're not actually frowning at you, but it's pretty cute. And just the fact that since the 1970s, these toads on the brink of extinction have been kept alive by people who care enough to do this, over 50 years, and they're still ongoing. And it gives me hope that there's a lot of people who do believe that life in and of itself has value. Like we don't have to care. Oh, we can't make money off the Houston toad. Who cares if it's going extinct? Like, no, that's not my mindset, and I feel like it's not the mindset of a lot of really good, hardworking folks. So, yeah, I'm definitely. I feel like we all have a very similar feeling, and it's just like it's so easy to end life, but life, if you think of the scale of the known universe, like it's rare and it's beautiful. And I'm really more impressed. Like my spouse is a veterinarian. People who can keep life alive, like they just like patch together a cracked up turtle shell, like out of basically, okay, not actually bubble gum, but that's essentially what they're working with. They're really like doing everything they can just to keep these little animals alive. That's really impressive to me. Just the just the protection, the perseverance of life.
Marytza, when you were composing the pieces, that went into your book, were you did you each time an animal species popped up, right, in your work, were you surprised, or did you have some in mind that were already kind of like knocking at the door and wanting a space in your writing?
I think that there are definitely a lot of birds and cats, different types of cats.
Yeah.
This is what I was saying back there, that, and it's not just domestic cats, it's the jaguars. And, in Southern California, we have the mountain lions that you're always hearing about, trying to find a way to get to the other side and getting hit on the freeways. And, how they're suffering, or even in between when the jaguars aren't able and the big cats aren't able to move, between the border because they're erecting these walls, how that's really disrupting those migration patterns. And the birds, we have an abundant, hummingbirds and hawks. And I think that I was just distilling that and bringing that in, but knocking on the door. I like the way that sounds, because they were very, very present, and I wanted to spend more time with them. And the way that I spend more time with creatures and people that I love, or that I want to love me, is to write about them.
So in her poetry collection, Headwaters, Ellen Bryant Voigt has this wonderful poem in which she says the following: "It matters what we're called, words shape the thought. It matters what we're called, words shape the thought." Now, I was wondering if each of you could tell us about the role of names and the act and the power of naming in your books.
Yeah, naming is, if we take the Judeo-Christian tradition, it's huge, right? This is what God gives Adam, and that is allegedly why we have dominion, quote unquote, over the animals, right? That's, a perspective. But I think that naming is also, it was funny, last night I was teaching a graduate poetry workshop, and we were talking about ways of invoking the body in poetry, right? And one of the things is through naming the body, right? You can name the body, and that brings the body into the poem, or you can invoke it via the sensorium. And one of the things that is interesting to me is I realized that in naming actually creates an argument. It makes a claim upon a thing, and it also, in the naming, says what it is not, right? And I think this is a really sort of important aspect of thinking about when we call something into being. And there's all types of theorists that have talked about this, like Louis Althusser, a Marxist, that talks about how we're hailed, right? Like when we say African American, that creates a category, that creates a political reality, a social reality, right? And so I think as a poet, I'm often trying to interrupt the received coin of terms, right? The received sort of naming, such that we can, one of the things I love is the way we can take something like a bird, and the bird no longer becomes a bird in the poem, right? Or even to interrogate the figure of bird, it becomes something much larger than that name, right? And so I just think that the poem is often interested in sort of I think I like to use this thing, we're holding everything in question in the poem, right? Whereas in prose, and I think maybe people argue, I think that we need a table to be a table sometimes in prose, where the table might not be a table in the poem. And that's what sort of the poem offers us, is this ability to interrogate what that sort of ontological possibility.
Yeah, names are a big one for me. Maria, and that one story has about 5 Marias in it.
Right.
And, my name, Marytza, too, is, derived from Mary and Maria. And I was always called Maria. People wouldn't bother to learn my name, especially when I was working, they would just send me an email and they would just assume oh, she's Maria, right? So, and I just thought about that, that's such a powerful name though. I mean, it's creation, if you can go into, yes, Mary, Mother of God, Mary Magdalene, but Mar, the ocean, that's right, where all life begins. And I just really loved that. I just really felt like I was part of this sisterhood of, all these daughters of the ocean. And I really hope that it's not too confusing, but I named so many characters Maria because I think that there's so many different facets of this creation. You can be destructive, you can be someone who conjures, you can be someone who just brings in different ingredients together and creates something new. I just felt like there was so much potential in this name Maria that has become, people dismiss it. They just say that it's so common. But I'm glad that it's common because, again, there's this sisterhood that has these ancient origins.
Right.
Yeah, naming is a lot of the characters in my book, like if they're important, I find I tend to name them after my maternal ancestors. Like Elatsoe was my first book. My grandmother was Anita Elatsoe Soto. My third book, the prequel to Elatsoe, is Shenet Lende, and that means sunflower and lipon. And that the name actually, this book is coming in 2024, so it hasn't been out yet, but I can say that the character, this is her namesake, but in the beginning, she doesn't even really know how to pronounce her own name. It takes place in the 1970s, which was a tricky time for Lipon people in Texas. But the symbolism of the sunflower itself kind of ties into her journey to, in a metaphorical way, she is finding it in herself to resist death, despair in the face of extinction, and then that tied into sunflower. But something that was unfortunate is, so I use a lot of these Lipon terms, especially for naming, because names are important for us and they're done a little bit differently. All right, Little Badger is the English translation of the Lipon name I was given when I was 18, so I just graduated high school. And names are given to you once your personality has developed such that the name reflects who you are. So it's actually, I use the English translation, one, it's easier for people to say, but also because the name that you're given is sacred. And so there's that kind of barrier where people aren't really saying it, but anyway. But I did, when I decided to write books, I did kind of wonder to myself, should I even do this? Should I go with my father's name? He's Irish American. His surname is Ryan. My surname is Ryan. I was like, should I write under Ryan? That's why I published my science with. But then I was just like, no, because I think around that point, it was when my publisher was kind of courting me. I'm published with Levine Carrito, and Arthur Levine used to work with Scholastic. He actually split off with Scholastic to start his own publishing. I'm part of the first group of books that came out there. But when I first met him, he was with Scholastic, and my mother went with me to visit the Scholastic headquarters in New York. I was like, whoa. We went up to the guard of this building, and he asked my mother for her name, and it's Walking Woman, and he actually laughed at it. And I was like, so here I am with my mother in this proud moment, about to meet these people who are going to publish me in this great story, Elatsoe, and this guy laughed at her, and he thought it was a joke, but he wasn't trying to be mean. So I was like, you know what, screw it. But it still is difficult though, because Shenilente technically should be written with some diacritics. I think that's the word. There's a little slash through the L. There's this little thing or an E. We couldn't put that on the title because apparently the publishing, I guess the way that they're putting computers really couldn't handle this. And so we were trying to find a way the cover has Shenilente, no diacritics, that's the title, but there's little UV reflective marks on the cover that people can see it. But I think that having pride in your name, especially because indigenous names have been mocked so mercilessly for so long. And I mean, they still are. People think they're really funny, but having pride in that and finding the strength and the meaning and the purpose of these names and what they reflect to you has been something that's been empowering in my life, and that I hope that children reading, or teenagers, they're a little older than children, if there are Native youth or even other youth with names that get mocked by ignorant people, if they can find kind of a way to connect with that and realize that they should be proud of themselves. And I think that's a good element to this in my books. Well, I hope that they have some sort of comfort from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Marytza, I was thinking about how, when you're mentioning reminding us of all the Marias in your book, when folks go to a bookstore and they see books on the shelves, oftentimes they think or might believe that the version that they see on the shelf is the version that arrived like on an editor's desk, on a publisher's desk, and not really understand that there's a push and a pull, right? And oftentimes, in the best of scenarios, it's collaborative, right? It's a collaborative process with your editor and marketing team and all that. And I was just wondering if each of you could talk a little bit about the delivering, right? The delivering of the manuscript, and that what came to mind, Marytza, was I could imagine someone saying, maybe a few less Marias in this book. Maybe there's a little too many, like enough with, I was
get
just,
it.
Right. We get it, right. So I was just wondering if y'all could, chat about that a little bit.
Yeah, that was me. I was like, are there too many Marias?
Yeah.
But there are never too many Marias. I took out quite a few stories when I first found an editor, and it was with the short story Tunnels, and there were 2 additional stories to support this other story. And quickly, it's about a family that figures out a way to. I don't know if you're familiar with Prop 187 in California, pretty hateful proposition that was passed in the 90s and that was defeated in the 90s. And I remember that our family had so many arguments about it. And, there are people that like, this is, cruel. And the other were like, well, maybe it's not a bad idea. So I remember just coming off of that, what would happen if that did become the way of the law of the land. And it was a story of a family that determines a way how to create tunnels underneath the Southwest United States and create a network. And jaguars are heavily involved in it, and so are pigeons. And 2 of the supporting stories for this was all about the mechanics of how these pigeons are utilized as a form of communication, as a way of being, subversive and not being caught, and just being able to reprogram pigeons, so, when they're homing, so when you let them go, they'll go back home. You can drive them 3,000 miles away and they'll find their way back home. But I was curious what would happen if you could program pigeons to go to places they had never been to before. So I just that story was for me. That was one of the stories that was really, really for me. And when I looked at it in the rest of the book and the way that it talked to the other stories, it just wasn't a good fit. And it was more up to me to just figure out how to distill it into that one story, Tunnels. So it was very different. And then the drawings didn't exist. I have some drawings, and I encourage people to, once you have the book, to color it and to use this as a place to experiment with the self-portrait. And that's not something that I had when I submitted the manuscript initially, or even the maps for Maria Maria. So it felt like I was given permission to really just go fully into the world. And I had a really supportive editor that was like, okay, like, this is what the story looks like to you, and this is how it makes sense. And I said, yes, this is what the story is demanding. Then I was able to take some things out and add things in. And that was a whole other different process from the initial writing of it.
It makes such a world of difference when you have that, there's that openness, right, at the editorial level.
Yeah, I was very lucky.
For me, with Best Barbarian, originally I'd signed a contract with Norton for another completely different book. It was called On Paradise. And I'm the type of poet, type of writer, I don't care what contract I sign. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to put out a book just because I signed a contract. Like, I just don't care about finances in that way, and they're not paying me enough to care about finances in that way. And so it was years. It was 9 years between my first and second book. And I was working on this poem on Paradise. It's a long poem, and it just wasn't coming together. And so I started working on other poems, and actually that Children Listen, the second poem, was the one that announced to me that I had another sort of book that I was writing. But I very much took my time. And I was willing for the world to forget that I was a poet. And I think that's to me, that was maybe one of the greatest lessons I've learned in that book was we're right in this age where, like particularly I think about hip hop right now, people are putting out so many albums per year, right? So many songs, right? Because the whole idea is I got to be in your face, right? Like social media. If I'm not, like if people don't see me tweeting, then do I exist, right? And I think that is actually not a way to make anything that's going to endure, right? You might make something that'll be like, oh yeah, I remember that part, but like, will we remember like the 5th Drake album from this year? I don't know. I don't know, right? Will we remember, like I think Beyonce makes things in a much slower fashion, right? Not that I think, that she's the best of us. But what I did was I just took my time. And even when I submitted the sort of manuscript, I changed, I think 25% of the poems the October before the March it was published. I was still rewriting. Like to me, the poem's never really done. And also the book, when you're putting a book of poems together, it's not like making one poem. You're actually now thinking about this as like this long poem. And so there's certain things that you're going to have to change because you're going to see different aspects. Like I was writing, so the structure of the book to me is a jazz song. You have like the opening A section in a jazz song, which is the melody. Then you have 2 solos. And I had one solo originally in the book, which was this narrative poem called Domestic Violence. And then as I was building out the last section, I had this fragment of a poem called Something About John Coltrane. I was like, oh, that's the other solo. So I had to like write that poem before I thought, oh, this is a longer poem. I'll wait. Like that'll be for the next book. And I was like, oh no, it belongs in this one. So I had to like stop making the manuscript and just make a new poem, right? And so the book was teaching me how to make it. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fortunate enough that my editor, Nick, that's actually one reason why because there was this point where, Living Credo just formed and my contract was with them when it was the whole thing. So I had to choose between going with this new indie publisher or staying with Scholastic. And I went with the indie publisher because my relationship with my editor was a pretty good one in that, excuse me, I'm still a little sick. So like, excuse me. Nick, I think that he is more likely, if he's unsure about something that might be related to my vision for the story, he will pose a question instead of saying, change this. So I did just get back copy edits for Shande Lende. And before that, I did the full editing thing with him. And what he will do is, in the first round of edits, he will read the draft that I send in and then come back with, first of all, positives, which is great. That's great to read those, but also more like just areas and questions and places where he thinks maybe he could do more development. So it's more open-ended. And I think through that, he recognizes that sometimes, he is a white guy, doesn't quite get what I'm going for with my stories. And he's definitely, he wants me to have that opportunity to tell things in my voice, like what my vision for the story is, but also he wants to give me things to work with because my first drafts are definitely not perfect. I don't think anyone really writes a perfect first draft. And if you do, then you're just incredible. But yeah, it's so like the copy edits are when he gets more like nitty gritty. And I wonder if he kind of like gauges my direction for the book based on how I respond to his initial open-ended type suggestions and then like hones thing in, because I really haven't. There have been little things where I'll be like, oh no, I don't want to change that, and here's why. But there's been nothing major. And in fact, like he helped me like workshop the end for Snake Falls Earth like 5 times. It was like 5 different endings, wow. And finally, I wasn't happy with them until that last one. And I do think it's because he kept like pushing me. So I'm a little bit nervous because I'm like starting to write an adult book for the first time. And I'm like, I'll probably have a different editor. I don't know what that's going to be like, but hopefully it'll be as positive as the experience I have with Nick. So,
Roger, in that solo, something about John Coltrane, you write, John Coltrane, even in death, is a perfect instrument of water and working the day past its zero. In the Western idea of heaven, someone dies and they get a condo in the sky, and we never hear from them again, like moving to Florida. Death means something different in all three of your books. And I'm wondering, what traditions are you in conversation with regards to the idea of death, the reality of death?
Yeah, I think I'm in so many, I think about African-American Christianity, which is not the Christianity I would offer that is happening in a lot of white churches in America. I don't think that Jesus, the white Jesus, is the same black Jesus, right? And there's a reason so I grew up in this Pentecostal church that really believed in spirit possession in a way that is kind of anti-Christian. And I was really interested as I got older, the way in which I was very much raised once I learned what Yoruba was and learned about Vodun, and I learned about all these other traditions, I was like, oh, this was actually more of a syncretist sort of idea of Christianity. But you can't tell the people in the church that, right? They believe in the condo in the sky with the starry crown, right? And so what's interesting to me is, I think sort of the tradition I'm pulling on is the idea, it's like the way, to me, African spiritual, certain types of West African spirituality also pull on physics, right? The way in which energy is neither created nor destroyed, right? The energy sort of moves and changes. So I think about I think about folk and hoodoo, right? I think about sort of my grandmother telling me things about growing up in South Carolina at the turn of the 20th century, right? All of these had very different ideas of sort of death. One of the things I write about in my newest book, Hush Harbor, Dark Days, is this thing called the Hush Harbor, right? And the Hush Harbor was, during slavery, right, black folks had to go to church, right, with the master. And if a plantation was big enough, there would be a church on the plantation, and he would bring in a preacher, and they would preach to the slaves, to the enslaved people. Obviously, that Christian lesson is going to corroborate slavery. So black folks would decide to sort of have church unto themselves, and they would call it a hush harbor, and it would often be on the edges of plantations near bodies of water, because they believed that the water would hush the sound, would sort of secret the message being sent. But what was interesting is, all of the rituals of hushing sound remind me of things that I've read about when I've been reading about sort of West African religions, like hanging a pot of water from the ceiling, right? All of that to me was that's not Christianity per se in the sort of strictest sense. So for me, I'm pulling on so many different traditions, and at the simultaneously, I think about the way in which poetry has taught me sort of something, right? I think the best way to live forever is to sometimes just write a poem or treat someone well, right? That act lives on beyond us. Yeah. And then when I think about Coltrane, right? His sound is going to live. It's living his life, he's still so much alive, right? In the zeitgeist, when I think about all the musicians that are influenced by him, the way in which contemporary music is influenced by his sense of soloing, right? You don't have, Rakim said, do y'all know who Rakim is, the MC from the 80s, right? He said, Rakim creates the modern way, the way we think of hip-hop, not always sort of the rapper's delight hip-hop of ending with the end rhyme, right? We can have that internal rhyme. Rakim said, he was I was listening to Coltrane solos, and I was trying to approximate what it would be like to rap to a Coltrane solo. So the modern sort of iteration of the way in which we think of contemporary rap lyricism comes from John Coltrane, right? And someone listening to Coltrane and saying, oh, I think I can rap like that, right? I think I can rhyme in this way. I can use that sort of sense of sound, right? So to me, that's the way Coltrane is still alive, right? To me, art tells me that there might be a different way of thinking about the afterlife, right?
I have to think a little after. I grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic school. I don't know if it's fair to say that I grew up Catholic, but I did go to Catholic school for about 8 years, and it really instilled in a love of ritual and drama. in me, and I think that that's where we were talking about horror earlier. I think that like drinking blood and bodies and like all of that, that's what stuck. That's what I got from Catholicism. And I've been reading tarot cards for a very long time, and I spent some time with the Santera who. We talked about the syncretism with Afro-Cuban religions. And then when I moved to Los Angeles, there was an Afro-Brazilian community there that I took dance classes with, and that's where I learned a lot about the Orisha. And so a lot of these traditions and a lot of these ways of thought really just felt natural. I'm of Mexican descent, and we have a different relationship with death. And when I was younger, because I was growing up here in the States, my dad gave me Labyrinth of Solitude, and he gave me all of Octavio Paz's books, and he's like, this is what it means to be Mexican. And so I was just obsessed about like the whole, the relationship with death, like on your left-hand side, and, obviously the Day of the Dead. So similar to what you're saying, it was like energy doesn't go away. Energy is always here. So all of that feels like that informed what I think about life and what I think about death. And just this continuation of energy and a way to communicate with our ancestors and to really think about how, what we're doing today is like, our ancestors are also in us, like how that energy is in us. It's not, something external. And I think that really helps inform, and there is a little bit of peace there. I think I'm definitely not ready to go, and I'm definitely not ready to say goodbye to the people that I'm very close to, but there is an understanding there that it is going to happen. Recently, my husband has, he has a type of cancer that he's able to live with. And, when he was diagnosed, everyone says it's the best kind of cancer you can get. So, which is just like a really fucked up thing to say, but it works, it works in comforting us. But, and it took about a week for us after his diagnosis to start making cancer jokes with each other. So I was like, okay, this is how we're going to deal with it. And he's healthy. He's good. But, we talk a lot about it, and he meditates a lot on it, when it was kind of touch and go. And we have this shirt that he wears all the time that actually got him right before he started radiation. It says, "Death is certain," and has these little puppies on it. And it's just something that the way that we are able to talk about it. It's like, it is not this mystical thing. It is our bodies are going to decompose. It's just going to happen. And there is nothing that you can do to stop it. You can't control it. So that's the value then is on your life and who you're spending time with and how you're celebrating it and how you're able to just really always, enjoy the moment. I know that sounds so cheesy, but it really is something that's the best way I think that I can respect death is by really living and enjoying my life.
Nothing wrong with cheese. I'm a fan of cheese. I love what you said about our ancestors are within us. In our culture, there's so much talk about generational trauma, right? And not enough talk about generational joy, generational fortitude. That's in us also. So, Darcie?
Yeah, definitely when the themes of death, of the afterlife, of ghosts, things, they're very prominent in my short stories and also my books. Elatsoe and Shanalende both deal with a lot of that. Like in Elatsoe, the main question was, it's all very specific to Lipan Apache understanding of what ghosts are, what happens after we die. And I say that because you go to a different, even like a different Apache group, like the Mescalero, the Jicarilla, like their death-related ceremonies and traditional beliefs are like different from ours. And I think that's because like the Lipan Apache, like they went the farthest south. So our traditional homeland as of like 400 years ago is that border, across Texas and into northern Mexico, whereas other Apache groups are up north of us. So I think that maybe our concepts evolved a little bit in a different direction. So everything I do in the book is very specific to Lipan Apache things. And So my father, he is Irish American, but he really let my mother guide me in terms of a lot of our cultural, all of my cultural upbringing. And I remember asking my dad when I was a child, I was like, Dad, what happens after I die? And he was trying to comfort me. And he was like, oh, Darcie, it's like a sleep without dreams. And then I like started crying because I love to dream. I was just like, he didn't know what he did. He thought he was being comforting, but yeah, it's, I feel bad about that now. I was like, oh, I should have like had such a moment, but I do, though. It's a tricky subject because a lot of things are taboo, especially related to death, to burial, to ceremonies. I wouldn't put a ceremony in my book, even though I know what happens during them. And like I was at the blessing ceremony when there's this Lipan burial ground in Presidio, Texas, that for a long time was just going to ruin, and then Presidio actually gave it to my tribe like a couple years ago, which is huge. So we're now taking care of it. So I was there at the blessing ceremony, but I wouldn't put that in books. But on the other hand, I do think that art, especially when it comes to the types of books I write that really deal with hope and survival and stuff like that, sometimes I want to express myself in ways that maybe the super duper traditionalists won't be happy with, but I think are important. And a lot of this is because the Lipan Apache, we have just been on the brink for so long. So I know in my third book, there's this point where the main character actually goes to the underworld. She spends several chapters there. She's trying to bring a child back from there, which is kind of reflective of some of our traditional stories where people went to the underworld. And it's essentially her going through this process of confronting just that, depression and despair, and ultimately deciding that she wants to live, and considering just the rate of, mental illness and other things in my family, in my community. Native people have to go through that. Unfortunately, there's quite high suicide rates among Native people. And I think that this is something that we have to kind of confront, and I'm trying to do this through my art. So it can be difficult sometimes, like trying to decide which things are taboo, which things do I want to keep out of my books, and which things do I want to put in my books because they're very important for the message. And especially being a writer of fantasy, I don't want people to get the wrong idea. But I do feel that because I am writing from a place, like I grew up Lipan, I'm not trying to write about other Native people's, afterlives and stuff like that. So I'm very comfortable and familiar with my own culture, which is why I really only put, my own culture into my books in these ways. So that's been helpful. But yeah, it's definitely a very prominent theme, especially in my first and third books.
Thank you. And we've reached the time for a question and answer session. And I already see a hand up in the back row over there. So if you just hold on a second, we'll run a mic to you. That way everyone can hear your question.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, my name is Inika, and I want to say first, thank you so much for sort of talking about the precision of language when it comes to people's names. I am Black and Guatemalan. My dad is an indigenous person from Guatemala, but my name is spelled Inneke, and at the end of my E is an accent acute, that diacritic that you talked about. And for me, growing up, I was always kind of like, oh, it's okay if you don't include it, it's not that big of a deal, but now I have some, when I do research publications or when I write things, I make sure to ask to have that included because that is important to me, not because my name's Dutch from the Dutch Indonesia colonization, but my mom gave me that name and she spelled it that way. And so when you talked about the accent on your book and how important that was, I really felt you when you said that, Darcie, and that I really it really resonated with me. So I appreciate you guys talking about how important naming is and what names mean to us, and other people who you telling that story resonated with me and probably other people in this room. So thank you, first of all. My second question is probably more focused in the legislation that's coming out of Texas, and I don't mean this to be political at all. This is my first time being able to talk to people who are fellow artists and put art out into the world. What is your, not kind of your cognitive thoughts about the legislation with like book banning and things like that, but what is sort of your heart response to that when you think about emerging writers who are coming up and thinking that they may have to limit what they put out into the world in order to find a place for their art to land, be consumed and appreciated in Texas and probably beyond that if we kind of keep going the way that we are going with the political zeitgeist and movements that are happening. What do you guys think that looks like, those limitations?
Lip on Apache, like we are Texas state tribe, and I have to say that because of my workings with a tribe, I'm familiar with trying to deal with political entities in the state. All right, no comment on that, but I do want to talk about like book banning, especially you mentioned that concern that future writers, especially now that groups like not just Native writers, but other groups of formerly and currently marginalized writers are finally getting a little visibility. That fear that this trend for just like banning and censoring is going to make it more difficult for their voices to be heard. And like yesterday, I learned that A Snake Falls to Earth, this isn't Texas, but it was banned in Michigan and by the school board. It's one of like 193 books. And I'm going to get more into that on Instagram. And so that generated a lot of conversation between me and my sister-in-law, Kinsale, has something called the Indian Girls Book Club. So I've met a lot of young writers, in college who are just getting started, poets and fiction writers. And so they're like, I was actually talking to some of them who are like actually concerned. So what I am trying to do is now that I have visibility, like I know writers can't do everything and sometimes we just got to keep writing, but I'm going to use what visibility I have to push back against that and to share resources for, like, if people show up to their school board meetings, if you are a part of a community that's even in places like Texas, like, trust me, I know how difficult it can be. But just having the voices that are fighting for our books and our readers and show up and speak out and let people know that we are here and we're not going to be tolerating this kind of nonsense. I don't even know how to say it. But yeah, that's a good question. It's something I'm learning a lot about just because of this incident.
So I'm a writer who lives in Texas. I'm also a professor at the University of Texas at Austin. And what I've done is, along with other professors at the University of Texas, and I can say this, we've organized with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and brought them on to help us organize around Senate Bill 1718 that came up in last year's legislation. And so I've been mobilizing and working with professors from all over the state of Texas. We've had rallies at the Capitol. We've gone into Democrats that are supportive of the side of wanting to keep tenure and wanting to keep diversity in schools and don't want book banning. We've gone into Republican offices and talked to these folks. And we are continuing to do that work. There are, if you are interested in trying to get, particularly on higher ed, there's the AAUP, which is the Association of University Professors. They're organizing. There are a lot of sort of efforts in the state right now. So it may not look like it or it may not seem like it, but there's and we have to organize, but I'm kind of clandestinely a little bit because we do live in a state where the lieutenant governor will try to get you sacked if you say something that is true about his voting record, right? If we think about what happened at Texas A&M and the pharmacy professor, right? Look this stuff up, right? I think that, how do I say this? We're in a state now, and we're in a state in the United States where writing matters, where you can lose your job, they will try to deport you. That's good. Because for a long time, we were the wainscoting and the curtains on the building. We were nothing but decoration, right? The fact that when we do write something that may critique the powers that are in charge, that may say, no, we want diversity, that people, like that is, for so long, right, like our writing couldn't get us killed, right? We're moving back to the space where being a writer in America is dangerous, as it is in Eritrea, right? There are journalists that have been in jail since 2002 because they decided to try to have a free press in Eritrea. There are folks all over this world who, when they put pen to paper, it is their lives at stake. I think writers in America, young writers, need to be aware of that. And that doesn't mean don't write, but it means that we need that, right? We're literally in a state for which you can't teach diverse text in K through 12, right? And now they're trying to limit diverse text in universities for adults, right? So when you ask, what do I tell young writers? Remember, who was it? I think it was somebody in the Black Arts Movement said, writing is fighting, right? Your sword, the pen is your sword, right? So write. And we'll figure out ways to get it to the people that need it.
I agree that kind of organizing is critical and essential, and to be wary of self-censorship. Exactly what you're saying is these book bans and these legislation and the conversation around this restriction is to limit imagination. And I think as artists and as writers, that's exactly what you need to do, is to continue writing, and it will find its way into readers' hands. There are so many different ways. You're creative. You can find different ways to make sure that your stories are being told. And it's even the response to this sort of restriction and these bannings will come out in your stories. And I think that as long as you're just continuing to feed that and continuing to let your imagination be wild and free, then that's a way of fighting back. And it's a very critical way of fighting back. It needs to happen on all these different fronts.
Can I remind us of something? Like, I want to give us, like, if you're a young writer, young artist, or just a person, it doesn't have to be young or old. Remember that, like, there are other societies. We should, like, turn and do our research. This is the moment to learn who Shostakovich is, who literally was a Russian composer who was so feared that when he was making his music, that he was going to be sent to the gulags, that he literally would he would no longer sleep in his bed because he didn't want his family to see him snatched from his bed at night. So he stood by his door. He still made the same music, but he stood by his door with a suitcase every night, expecting, while he's making his music, right? I think that we have to remember, right, there's so many innovative ways to play with this. Like, I think about, when I was in my MFA, I really got into Russian fairy tales at the turn of the 20th century, because Russian fairy tales were where, like, they could put subversive things in, right? Like, though the censors weren't looking when they were talking about gooses transforming and doing all these things, right? We might have to go back to that too, right? Like, but what I want us to do is to not think that this is the first time. And I was reminded of, the idea of incendiary literature, abolitionist literature moving to the South in the 1700s and 1800s, right? Like, let's actually, like, research. Let's go back and see how other people dealt with regimes of oppression, right? Oppressive regimes. How did they get that literature to the people?
We have time for one more question. Anyone?
Okay, my question is for Marytza. Earlier, you mentioned that you write about things that you love and you write about things that you want to love you. I was wondering if you could elaborate on writing about things that you want to love you. Do you think that they are incapable, or do they love you and you still want their love? I'm just curious what you meant by that.
That's definitely where the next story I'm writing is coming from. And I think, we were talking about earlier, I need to become the writer. I need to become the person to write this other story. And I think it's the first time this book has everything that I carried with me probably from the first 30 years of my life. And now I am understanding, what it means to have desire and what it means to be curious about, the full spectrum of love that is available to us and that isn't available. And this is a place where I'm able to play because I have a relationship, I'm in a committed relationship, because I made a choice to not have children. And these are lifestyle choices that I've made that I'm not going to alter or to change, but I can experiment in my fiction through that. I can experiment what it means like to have an affair, or to have children, or to resent children. These are all these things that I actually don't know what it's like, but I'm very curious about it, and I've been asking people in my life very, very invasive questions because I'm trying to understand, what that looks like. I think that now it's just a little bit of an evolution of instead of spending all my time on things that I know and things that I really care about, and that again I can write, for days about the same thing, about like one tarot card or one jaguar or one passion fruit vine. And now I'm really curious about this sort of unmapped part of myself, and I want to be able to push it a little further and make myself uncomfortable in getting closer to what that could look like.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming and listening to these wonderful, talented, generous writers. I hope you have a good evening. There are books to buy, to get signed. Thank you.
Thank you.